Hi, good morning and welcome to Tuesday. Nice to have your company. Now, I've got a special guest in the studio this morning. Daniel from Collective Shout is a youth advocate, educator and event host, and Daniel partners with schools and communities to challenge porn culture and the sexualisation of women and girls. Daniel works with young men across Australia to reimagine healthy expressions of masculinity and manhood. And good morning and welcome to the studio, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Mike. Great to be here.
Nice to have that you've got time to come in and join us this morning. And if you are watching via Facebook Live as well, good morning and welcome. And if you are listening and you're near your device, you can switch onto your phone or your laptop or your computer if you're at work and join the conversation as well if you are on Facebook Live. Really appreciate you coming in, Daniel. I guess just to start off, what made you want to speak to young people about these issues regarding objectification, sex building, healthier relationships, masculinity, all those things?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike.
What's the motivator?
You definitely don't wake up in the morning going, do you know what I want to do is talk to teenage boys about pornography and sexualisation. But yeah. I do love it, I'm ultimately motivated because I care for the young people. They are negotiating challenges now that previous generations haven't, and it's our role as adults or older friends or older brothers and sisters to help them through these conversations. And for me personally, with everything, we have our own narrative that we bring to these conversations. And I was bullied a lot through high school. I went to an all-boys school. I didn't fit the stereotype. So I, as a result, experienced particular slurs as a result of that. And it always made me just wonder what is going on with the socialization of boys where we just go after people and we hound them and we try and cripple them with bullying and name calling and we just see that play out. And so I guess I want to push back on that and give boys the permission that they don't have to conform to these harmful stereotypes, that they can be courageous and resilient, but they can not do that at the cost of their empathy and their kindness and who they want to be in the world. So it's giving them permission. And ultimately, when we get these things wrong, we see the harms, we see the hurts for so many people. We've seen that with the testimonies of thousands of schoolgirls and sexual assault across Australia. So it's important that we get these right as a society, and we want to do that because we actually want good for these young people. We want to give them an opportunity to reflect and have a conversation, with themselves and with one another.
If you've got a question for Daniel, you can text in now 0429 985 985. We've got some questions already coming through, wow. Daniel, so we'll try and get to those very quickly. Thank you for that. But when you go and speak to school students, what sort of questions do they ask you? Are they pretty brave? Do they really open up to you because you're not a teacher at the school?
I think it gives me an advantage in some ways, and it's a privilege to be there and to be in that space where, young people do ask you questions. It takes them a while to get going, but by the end of it, we actually can't get everybody to be quiet, and then we find out that they've stayed up past 30 minutes past their lunch break to continue chatting with us. The girls are hilarious. The girls always want to know which boys' schools we're going to,
Right.
And they give us suggestions. Bless them. But in all seriousness, the girls ask some pretty heartbreaking questions, They want to know how they can actually say no, how they can push back on demands for naked selfies. They want to be equipped to actually push back on this, and they still want to have good relationships with the boys. They say, well, how do we have good friendships with the boys? How can we just form platonic relationships and we just want to hang out? We don't want it to be sexualized. So they're trying to find out how they can negotiate this. And I think I know that I've done a half decent job with the boys when they ask some really good questions, and I'm always impressed with them. Once we give boys the opportunity to think about these issues, it's actually extraordinary what they come up with. They say things like, how do we not be a bystander? How can we actually disrupt this stuff, whether it's in public, at a party, and combat harassment? And I'm always so grateful when a boy says, how do I know if I've got a problem with pornography?
Wow.
And that gives me a free hit, and what can we do then? So, yeah.
Daniel, we'll take a break. We'll come back and talk some more. I'm keen to ask about your approach regarding the parent and teacher presentations. We'll come back, good. But we've also got some questions coming through. If you've got a question for Daniel, 0429 985 985. Likewise, if you are watching on Facebook Live, you can make a comment or a question on our Facebook Live as well. Back after this. Morning. My guest in this studio this morning is Daniel from Collective Shout. Now, the following discussion may cause distress or trauma. If the topic which we've been chatting about this morning has triggered or distresses you in any way, please reach out to Lifeline on 131114. Now, Daniel, you speak to a lot of students at schools. Tell me about, how do you approach the parent and teacher presentations? What does that look like?
Yeah, hopefully with a lot of humility, given I'm neither a parent nor a teacher. But obviously our intent for that is to equip parents. I think it's easy to feel like this problem is so massive, social media is so big, the sexualized images are just everywhere, and obviously the problem of pornography. And we take them through, a realistic depiction of what's actually going on, what we're hearing from students. We don't want anyone to not be unaware, because if we're not honest about this, it's the kids that obviously get in harm's way. But we take them through that, and then we give them ways that they can actually have these conversations with their children, what they can do in terms of acting personally and acting collectively to address this, both in their homes, in their school communities, but also out in public, and politically as well.
Do you think they're shocked when they hear? I mean, you mentioned earlier about naked selfies, and that kind of like, what? That's a thing?
Yeah, that is a thing. Yeah, unfortunately so.
Wow. Okay, look, we've got some messages coming through. Thank you, Jenny from Beachboro. Now, Jenny's got a question. What are some examples of questions or conversation starters that we can bring up with young people, both primary and high school, to encourage open discussion around these topics that is gentle and not discouraging? We have nieces and nephews and want to be talking with them in this space at some point, but want to make sure it is healthy and appropriate depending on their ages. What are your thoughts on that from Jenny from Beachboro?
Thanks for the question, Jenny. Again, I'm not an expert or a psychologist, but from the books that I've read and how I've approached these conversations with the younger people in my life and my friends and family, is I like to get a sense of where they're at. So instead of speaking at the children, I think same thing that I do with the teenagers, getting a sense of, well, where do you think babies come from? Getting a sense of how they understand sex and love and intimacy and how they relate to their own bodies. And children are always, I've found, to be quite forthcoming. So are teenagers, when you give them an opportunity to reflect. And then how to picture age appropriate, because every child is different. Every child's been exposed to different things. And the biggest thing that we encourage parents is just not to freak out, not to react if your child does open up to you and says that they've seen something that scared them or hurt them online or made them feel uncomfortable. I can't imagine that feeling as a parent, but we just say we want to keep those lines of communication open. We don't want to overreact. We want them to feel safe to continue to come to us, to share these things.
What age group are you talking to in high schools, Daniel? Because Jenny mentioned about both primary and high. Are you talking to students at the first year in high school? Are you talking to them a bit later, like in the year 11, 12? What does that look like?
Yeah, all years. So from year 8 to 12, but we also speak to year 5, 6 and 7s. Now the content's obviously very different. It's very much about having a healthy relationship with your body, about consent, your own autonomy, and for example, that was a recent session that was with parents and their children at that younger age. But for high school, it's 8 to 12s, and unfortunately, the tragedy of this is we need to be having these conversations younger. We have year 7 and 8 students telling us pretty horrific stories of, what they're being sent on their phones, what they're seeing online, how they're speaking to one another, being compared to really sexualized and graphic images that they're seeing online. And we've seen that here, and that's not only that's not the only things that we're encountering, but it is happening younger. And I know that may be confronting for listeners to hear, but that no one is helped if we don't help young people through this and be aware of these challenges.
Jenny, thank you for your text message. We'll take a break. We'll come back and we've got some more coming through, Daniel. I'm keen to also find out about some of the feedback you get from students, but we'll come back after this. You are on 98.5 Weekdays with Mike. Back soon. And if you're watching via Facebook Live, a good morning to you. Thanks for joining the conversation this morning. We've got some more questions coming through. We'll get to those in just a moment, Daniel. But I'm curious to know student feedback. What sort of feedback do you get from the students after you've come, you've spoken to them, you've left? What happens after that?
Yeah, that's what keeps us going. Having the young women come up to us afterwards and say, thank you so much. We've never heard anyone tell us this before. We've never known that we actually had a say in all this, that we can say no. And I know that seems so tragic to our generation and so foreign, But these young women don't even feel like they can say no, because culture and so much of this sexualization is grooming them. It's preparing them to inhabit a world that sexualizes them all the time. And so for us, that's what, gets us going, is when these young women stand up and say, like, we just don't want this anymore. This isn't what we want. We want to form healthy relationships. And for the boys, it's great when they run with it and they commit to being courageous and using their masculinity for good, to not be bystanders, and I think that for me is what is the real confirmation. The best bit of confirmation we had was last week at a particular all-boys school where the lunchtime siren went, and the head of year came up to us afterwards and said, "Oh, you must have done a good job, because not one boy shuffled in their seats to leave for lunch, and they just continued to lean into the conversation." And that's something that stayed with me and has encouraged me. Yeah.
Wow, that is very encouraging. Daniel, we'll try and get through these. We've got heaps coming through. Thank you for your text messages, and thank you for joining the conversation on Facebook Live as well. Thank you, Vic from Eglinton says, porn related, can we please ask the question why porn is so open? The government clearly have the power, like in terrorism, to censor online and control what we see. Can't it be limited with a credit card number? Does it have to be expensive? It doesn't have to be expensive. I'm sure porn sites and adult stories will love this. Kids don't have credit cards. Can't we start a petition to limit free porn? What's your thoughts on that from Vic?
It's fantastic. Thank you so much, Vic. You've given me a free hit to speak to something.
He says we have to do something.
We have to do something. Yeah. And the reality is the evidence is there. It's 100% clear, the harms of pornography and sexualization. Just to go on a little aside, people who are exposed to sexualized content have a diminished view of women's morality, competency, and humanity. There's a meta study that points to that. I can supply, the listeners afterwards. So we're not talking about something small, because we know what happens when we diminish the humanity of other people. And this is exactly what pornography does. And the harms in particular for children being exposed to this are frightening. And we hear stories all across the country about, children having to be in therapy, getting help and being so traumatized by what they're seeing or being exposed to. And a lot of them aren't looking for it. It finds them. And that's why, Vic, you're 100% right. We need to do something about this. So whilst I have the opportunity, I just would love to speak to the Protecting the Age of Innocence report that was tabled at Parliament House at the beginning of 2020. And for all listeners, I would go and speak with your members. They are there to represent you. And if they're not looking after the best interests of their children, of our children, then I don't know what they're there for. Ultimately, that is what government is there to do. And so I would encourage them to look into the Protecting the Age of Innocence report. You can download it. It was presented to the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs. And this looks into, we need to have age verification as a very minimum. As far as I'm concerned, pornography should be banned, because there is absolutely no good for it. But at the very least, can we please put age verification? Children should not be exposed to this. They shouldn't be able to access it,
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And we'll go to another break, but we've got to also, thank you, Deborah from Les Moody. We were talking about at what age to have these conversations. Now, Deborah says, I teach in primary school, ideas for conversation for year 4s. Year 4.
Yep.
Is that a bit early?
It's not in the sense that we have to have a sexualized conversation with them, but there's no reason we can't be talking to even younger children about their own body, about respecting themselves, respecting others, understanding, what their private parts do and that they are their own, and what consent is. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a whirlwind tour of sexualization, but it's age appropriate to help them understand who they are and to be able to make good decisions and to know if they're in danger, to know that they can talk to mummy and daddy. That's the important part with those conversations. Great,
Daniel. We'll take a break. We'll come back and talk some more. You are on 98.5. This is Weekdays with Mike. If you've got a question for Daniel while he's in the studio or via Facebook Live, 0429 98.5 98.5. Back after this one. Good morning if you are joining us on Facebook Live as well. Good to have your company this morning. Daniel, got some more questions coming through.
Fantastic.
Surprise. It's been great, hey? We've had so many great questions coming through. Got a question from Sunny from Como. Says, hey Dan, how do we start disruptive conversations with people we have known for a long time? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Sonny. This is super important and a conversation I have with the boys and with the girls, but in particular with the boys, to disrupt those harmful narratives, to intervene when we see someone saying an offhand remark or a sexist joke or these sorts of things that we've all heard from time to time, and we give them a list of things. You don't have to go and take on a whole crusade about the history of feminism and unpack each point, and but what you can say things like, I don't get it, mate, I don't know if we'd agree with that. What did you mean by that? I don't think that's all right. Or you could just walk away. you could just walk away and not engage, if you don't feel comfortable to verbally disrupt. But yeah, I think we owe it, to the people in our lives, to make them feel safe, to let them know that comments like that aren't going to fly.
Sonny, thank you very much for your question. Daniel, we'll take a break. We'll come back and wrap things up this morning, but we are going to continue tonight. So we've got some other questions that have come through, and I'm just going to thank you for some of your comments and questions via Facebook. This one is saying, I haven't got your name, but thank you. You may be aware of the collection of stories from New South Wales young women documenting their experiences of rape, sexual assault and sexual harassment at the hands of their male classmates, and the petition calling for better consent education. Do you think education is enough to address this issue? Thank you for that question. We're actually going to tackle that tonight at a later time between 7 and 8. But we'll come back.
Question.
It is a great question. Thank you for that. We'll come back and wrap things up. You are on 98.5 Weekdays with Mike. In the studio this morning is Daniel from Collective Shout. Just to finish off for this morning, Daniel, but we're going to get you back from between 7 and 8 p.m. tonight. And if you've been listening this morning or watching on Facebook Live, good morning. We are going to go, we've just teased a little bit of the type of topic or the questions. We're going to go a little bit deeper with some of those issues that you are dealing with each time you go out to a school. This work you do obviously is quite challenging with lots of heartbreaking stories, I would imagine. What gives you hope in all this?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. I get this asked often. People always say, you're always upbeat and so excitable at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it's because, yes, we've confronted some really dark and confronting issues, but seeing the young people's eyes light up, to get a story last week from one of the all-girls schools where they said, the teacher said, watching the girls stiffen up in their seats and find their voice and speak out, and just seeing that across the room, hearing that reported just fills you with such hope and such, comfort that if we give these young people an opportunity to actually critique these messages, to look at this cultural formation that they're finding themselves in, where they're being preyed upon and groomed by so many toxic messages, once they get the opportunity to see that they're being lied to, they then want better for themselves. And it's the same for the boys. The boys want to break free of some of these more harmful stereotypes and actually be healthy, good young men. They want to form good relationships. They want to be men of integrity. And it's about giving them the opportunity and modeling that, showing that we're going to celebrate that as a culture. We're going to, validate that. And so, yeah, a couple of the most beautiful stories was, some of the boys that we encountered over the last few weeks in WA was just extraordinary. One of them in particular stayed around afterwards and he just said, I'm just so sick of hearing, derogatory remarks made about women, in the world. And he's like, I just want to call it out. And we said to him, where did you get that from, young man? And he said, oh, my dad.
Wow.
My dad has been such a good role model for me. He's just modeled that in how he treats my mum and how he's raised us kids. He just expects us to, be respectful and to be kind. And I was like, wow, it moved us deeply.
Wow, that's incredible, Daniel. We are out of time this morning. Really appreciate you coming in. We're going to catch up tonight between 7 and 8 and go a little bit deeper, as I mentioned. But you're heading off from Perth at the end of the week. When are you next back in Perth?
Yeah, fantastic. Can't wait.
Is the demand getting higher, I would imagine?
I think with everything happening nationally in the cultural conversation we're having, yes, it is. There is a demand. There is a need for this. And people have seen it. COVID has only amplified the challenges of increased screen time, of what children are, having to negotiate at home, and parents as well. I feel for them. So, yes, we will be back in August. We're going to be here speaking in schools in August and look forward to it. I'm obviously a Perth boy originally, so I love any opportunity to come back and enjoy family, friends, and the sunshine here and to engage with the schools here. So thank you so much, Mike. It's been a real privilege to be here with you.
Pleasure having you in, and thank you for all of your text messages, and also if you've been watching via Facebook Live as well. We're going to continue this conversation tonight and go a little bit deeper between 7 and 8 p.m. You are on 98.5. It's good to have your company.